think it starts with humility. I think sometimes, though, humility comes with age, comes with mistakes. Life humbles you, and it forces you to become humble. Some of us are born humble. I don't know if I was humble. I think FlightBridgeED has made me humble. So you got to be aware of those things and be willing to put in the work. And I think that's the key, is you have to work at it, right? You got to be willing to put in the work. And I don't think it's that much. I think you said it perfect. Try to make yourself better 1%.
You on 8? You on 8. Okay, you're clear. Stand by for your base.
Welcome to EMS Cast, where we provide high-level education for you, the providers on the streets. Will and I just got back from Fast 24 in Wilmington, North Carolina. If you haven't heard of it, Fast 24 is an annual educational conference put on by FlightBridgeED each year. We had just a great time out there, met a ton of really great people, had a lot of fun hanging out and getting to check out all the really cool lectures that they had. There were some awesome pre-conference workshops and then 2 days of just great lectures by nationally renowned speakers. And we can't thank Evan and Eric and all of the people at FlightBridge enough for welcoming us to the conference. While we were there, we were actually able to snag some of these awesome speakers and chat with them after their lectures, from people like Scott Weingart of MCRIT, to Jeff Murphy of Master Your Medics, to many more. And we're really excited to bring you guys those interviews in the coming months. But to start us off, today's episode is with the man himself, Eric Bauer. Eric is one of the original founders of FlightBridgeED. He has over 3 decades of experience in the EMS field, with some 20 years of that specializing in the critical care helicopter EMS transport services. He has accumulated numerous educational awards through his work with FlightBridgeED and is continuing to push and move forward the quality of education that is provided in the critical care pre-hospital services. Eric was gracious enough to sit down with us during the conference, and we chatted about where this idea for FlightBridgeED came from and the lessons he's learned through the years of his critical care education. I want you to reflect during this interview. How can we take those lessons into our own learning and path towards expertise? A disclaimer for this episode: it was recorded on site at the conference, so the sound quality is not quite up to our usual standards, but we know you're still going to love all of these lectures and content we're going to bring you, because with each one of these interviews, the speakers dropped bombs of wisdom. So without further ado, let's get to the interview. We're here with Eric Bauer, the co-founder of FlightBridge, who graciously allowed us to come to this conference, talk with some of the speakers, do some on-site episodes for you guys. And so we're excited to have him on the podcast and tell us a little bit about FlightBridge and the conference and how this kind of all born in the philosophy.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. Thanks for coming. I know,
of course,
everybody's time is valuable. And so I think it was really Evan's brainchild to really invite as many content creators to the conference, which I love. And I hope we keep expanding on that. Yeah, FlightBridgeED really was an idea that I toyed with for about a year. Let's say it really comes full circle having Scott Weingart here, because he was really my inspiration. I started listening to him from the very beginning, first podcast. And I had flown at that point about 6 years. And man, when I found that podcast, and there was another podcast that started a little after that called ICU Rounds with Jeff Guy, who was an intensivist out of Vanderbilt. I just couldn't get enough.
Yeah. I have to confess real quick, we just chatted with Scott and we have a similar story in that his podcast was a big reason we started this, maybe for slightly different reasons. When you're a budding brand new paramedic working on an ambulance on the streets, you're hungry to learn more. You just learn the superficial stuff. And so you go to paramedic textbooks and they're just superficial. They don't teach you any more pathophysiology that you need to know. And so you start going to physician resources like MCRIT, but then it's like a little too over your head. It doesn't really teach to your resuscitation in the streets. And so we wanted to bridge that gap.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's perfectly said. I think that was what I saw. I saw as a flight paramedic flying into these small communities and saw EMS. I saw the hospital systems. It wasn't they weren't trying to do the very best for their patients, but you could definitely tell they weren't up on evidence-based practice. There was a big gap. And so taking his coined slogan of upstairs care downstairs, I toyed with it again for about a year. And I'm like, how could we bridge the gap from critical care to the streets? And really my initial idea was try to build the knowledge base between a ground paramedic or an ER nurse to become a flight nurse, flight paramedic. That was really the start. Then I met Evan, met my wife, met Evan, moved up to Kentucky, changed companies to Air Methods. That's where Evan and I were at the same base. He had an IT background, self-taught, toyed with it a little bit, said, hey, what if we did a podcast? We named it together. So Evan and I really were the original founders. And then Ashley, she has obviously been amazing. She runs the company from a day-to-day operations now, but it was never her dream. And so it started just with that podcast, putting one out every 2 weeks. And man, I had no clue what I was doing, right? Had no clue.
Join the club.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't. Like, I still have the original mic. It was like a 1999 Logitech that I put on my chest and sat there, and the dog would bark or somebody would knock at the door, and I didn't even know how to edit the freaking podcast. And I would be 30 minutes in, and I would delete it because I thought it was messed up, right? Stupid stuff like that. And so we just started being consistent with putting out content, and that organically grew an audience. And I think when we started realizing that we had something, about six to 8 months later, we were getting asked, hey, do you teach critical care review courses? Nobody was doing that. There was online options. There was Will Wingfield's option and Baca's option, but nobody was doing. They both had moved on to different careers. And so there was definitely a gap in the industry. And so that's where Ashley really jumped in, and we co-taught, started teaching review courses. And we still did it part-time up till 2017, where at that point I was working clinically, and I had a job in Denver under Alan Wolf. And I was either into Denver traveling, or I had a review course. I just couldn't sustain it. And so that's a big step to say, you know what, it's time to hang up that full-time job. I had a pretty good 6-figure salary, and I was like, how do we replace that income? And it was the best decision ever. She supported me. She's a full-time nurse practitioner at the time. So thank God that was in place, and we never looked back. And then it just exponentially just grew once I was able to just step in with 2 feet and devote my time. Knew I had to make it successful to survive, right? That kind of motivates you a little bit.
Yeah.
And I think we just tried to be true to put out good content that's evidence-based. But as you guys probably know, it's also, and I don't say this in a negative way, that there's a burden to it, because you're always having to think of new content. And your mind is always having to be, you have to pay attention to your surroundings. You got to pay attention to the industry, to evidence, reading studies. And that's a lot. It's a lot.
Yeah. And then when you're preparing the content,
Absolutely.
making sure that you're on it, you're not going to say something wrong, misstep. Yeah.
And I think the ideas come fast, right? Like you see something with a patient or a call, and like that would make a great episode or whatever. But then the behind the scenes work with the research, and that didn't feel like it went well. Am I wrong? So then there's like self-study involved in that, and self-reflection. And then, to your point, a lot goes into bringing something packaged.
Sure. Yeah, because I think that's the thing I've been asked to help or mentor other new podcasters. And the number one thing I've always said is you've got to stay committed, right? If you truly want to build an audience, if you say, I'm going to put a podcast out every week, you need to understand how big of a deal that is. That is a lot of times unrealistic. 2 weeks, every 2 weeks, that's still a lot. I don't know how some of these podcasters put one out every day.
Right.
It's just, they have to have a staff that is coming up with the content and the guests and stuff like that. But that is a lot. So I think that's huge, just to share. If you have other people come to you and say, hey, what made you guys successful? I love pushing that forward, because that's, again, having him here, Weingart here, we wanted to recognize him. I got to have dinner with him last night. It was pretty cool. Got to sit down and just chat, shoot the shit. And once you break down those barriers, we're pretty much on the same page. But you hold people as a hero, right? And so getting to get to know him and figure out how he ticks and just talk about life was really cool.
Yeah. Did you ask any of those questions about what made him successful? Did you learn anything?
I did. Yeah. I asked him what was the initial vision for MCRIT. And I think he talked about it in there, right? Just seeing that there was definitely a gap. But that is like, there's a small percentage of people that would have the guts to push up against a system, because it's a system problem. You got to look at it as little chunks. I look back at 12 years of FlightBridgeED, I look back at what we built. It's overwhelming to think that, but it happened organically and slowly, right? And you build a team around you that helps you do that. So I think, but for him as a physician, that's a monumental thing. What he has done has been a lot harder than what we have been able to build, because he's dealing with such a system-wide issue. And you guys see this. You see this in different cities and different protocols and different medical directors, right? Ultimately, we're all paramedics. It's a big difference having a physician say something on a podcast versus one of us. So I've learned to try to be broad strokes in what I say, not take hard stances, because it doesn't matter. Even though I might have a pretty strong opinion, in the end, it doesn't matter. The medical director for that program is going to make the decision.
Right.
But if we could plant something in their head or share something with one of the staff where they take a paper to a medical director and that medical director is open for that, that's how we make change as paramedics, is having them listen. That's where I feel like we can make that difference. But
yeah, and I think an understanding of the guiding principles, right?
Yeah.
Protocol may say one thing, but if you understand some of the principles behind the pathophysiology and the management of that patient, you can know when to push the protocols or push back a little bit or plant that seed, like you said.
Right.
One tangible example, I know that you're very passionate about mechanical ventilation, and you've authored a book about it as well. Tell me, as one example of what you're talking about, how did that all come about, and where did that passion start for you?
Well, so let me start by saying this. Last night, when one of the conversations we were having with the group of us was the difference between competent and expert. And how do you get new providers that are coming in the industry to care? How do you do that? And I don't know how to do that.
Unfortunately, sometimes I think they develop that through error, which is not great, right?
And I think a lot of us learn through messing up. But are you self-aware? And so Scott Weingard's point was, he doesn't know if somebody that is an expert versus competent, when you look at the difference, it might seem wide to us, but from a patient outcome standpoint, he feels like it's pretty small. And be that slow to speak, quick to listen, and look at things from a kind of a broad strokes perspective, always be open to learning, stay curious, but maybe obsessiveness isn't healthy. I think I'm obsessive. And so I say that, and he said he was obsessive. You guys might be the same way. Like, you're obsessive about learning something that maybe you failed in, or you recognize a weakness in yourself. I think that's good, but it can be an overpowering thing where maybe you alienate your family, or you alienate your wife, or you just don't put a focus in. And I think that is where the mechanical ventilation comes in for me. Is I was handed a ventilator. I had flown a couple years for a program in Southern Oregon. We had auto vents on the helicopter, bagged our patients. So this was 2003, 4, 5. And then I moved. I ended up taking a fixed wing job in Arizona, flying on the Navajo reservation. And I was handed an LTV 1000. And we got very little training. And all of a sudden I had 2-hour flights with a ventilator with those capabilities, and scared the shit out of me. And I thought, oh my gosh. So I just started practicing. I'd put a CPAP mask on myself. I'd put it in assist control. Knew I didn't like that. Put it in a SIV, right? I would try to make it work, and then I would put it on a patient and then make a couple changes, and just being curious and realizing, hey, this was a problem in this patient, and building those building blocks as my career went on, and then becoming maybe a subject matter expert at the time to that company. I look back, I wasn't, and then starting to train others. And then you learn through teaching that you don't maybe know, because you get good questions from people, right? And then that should continue to make you more curious. And I still get questions when I teach these courses that make me have to scratch my head. I just redid our vent course, the Art of Ventilation course, and I learned a lot through that process. Am I up 100% on waveforms at the time? No, because I'm not working clinically anymore. And so I had to brush up on that stuff, right, to be able to articulate it and present it. So the whole vent book, it's the same questions you get from everywhere you go. And I saw it at these different flight companies that I worked for, and then being involved at a high, broad optic with Air Methods nationwide. It was the same thing. It was the same thing at every base, same thing regionally. And so that's where that book came from. It was, let's start with the foundations, right? I don't think the book's perfect. I'm rewriting the book now. It's funny, you read old stuff he wrote and you're like, God, you know.
You talk a lot about that relentless pursuit of excellence. Do you, for the new provider who's trying to become excellent, you can't just do that overnight.
Right.
Do you have any tips of how you systematically approach that, get better, just 1% better each shift?
Yeah, I think it starts with humility. I think sometimes though humility comes with age, right? It comes with mistakes. Life humbles you and it forces you to become humble. Some of us are born humble. I don't know if I was humble. I think FlightBridgeED has made me humble because I think I've realized a lot of people are listening and you can come across the wrong way, right? You have the spotlight on you. I don't care if you're writing a blog, right? If people are reading that stuff, you got to come across the right way or people aren't going to listen to what you're saying. So I think that is huge. You got to be self-aware of your own deficiencies. And I think you said it perfect. Try to make yourself better 1%. Be aware of maybe a patient you just had that you didn't feel comfortable with. I don't know how much you guys teach, but I always know if I haven't taught a subject in a long time. Great example, the review course I've taught 400 times. I know that content inside and out. I could have no slides in front of me and pretty much know what to teach. But there's a couple lectures that I never teach, and that's endocrine, environmental toxicology. I hate those subjects. Like, those aren't fun subjects. And so I know that could I fake it? Could I get through it? Fine, sure. But I know internally I'm extremely uncomfortable, right? So you got to be aware of those things and be willing to put in the work. And I think that's the key, is you have to work at it, right? You got to be willing to put in the work. And I don't think it's that much, right?
It's really not. I mean, especially if you take the mentality of just a little bit better each day, it adds up. And
it does.
Before you know it, right? It feels slow. It feels like you got to know it all now. But if you take it slow and one step at a time, it really adds up.
And sometimes I think you have to push through. We've all, I think, experienced this either directed at us or seen it in our workplace, where I'm just going to take your example of deep diving into the ventilator.
Yeah.
Someone will be like, why are you nerding out on that? Or why do you care so much about that? And then all of a sudden, a decade later, when you're like, people are asking you questions about it stuff, they're glad you deep dove into it. But I think there's been times where, it's easy to throw stones at the person that's showing so much attention to what feels like minutia until then it pays off down the road.
No, that's spot on. I think sometimes you can come across to your peers as maybe not everybody responds well to somebody that's always studying. And I think there's a stereotype that is labeled to you. And yeah, I think that you have to stand alone sometimes. I try to challenge flight crews. We do a lot of stuff with Apollo MedFlight. And I was just in Amarillo, and I met with every single flight crew through 2 or 3 days. And I asked the newer ones, I said, over the last seven shifts, how many times have you pulled the vent out at the beginning of the shift and just played with the buttons? And you would be amazed. You get half of them that say yeah and half of them that say no. And, I think it takes 30 minutes a day. Like you said, it's just a small little building blocks. And I think you really do reduce your anxiety on a piece of equipment, knowing the menus and knowing where things are at, because that can build stress. And I think one thing that Scott Weingart said in there that was powerful is I need to know how to change the bed sheets. That is humility. He doesn't need to do that. He doesn't need to do some of those procedures. He has a whole team that can do that. But he's willing to learn that stuff because that's best for the patient. Because what if we do have a situation where, resources are limited? He could act on that stuff. And I love that. So I think you just have to be willing to know every job in an organization. Something my grandpa told me. Be somebody that is a jack of all trades, right? But that is that's if we knew how to get across, because I said last night, you have 10% of the people out there that are insatiable about learning something, and then you have the 90%. And I think it's easy if you're obsessive about learning something to want to teach to the 10%. And that's not who you need to teach to. You need to teach to the 90%. 10% will take care of themselves. They're going to figure it out themselves. They're going to learn. They're going to be driven. So how do you reach the 90%? How do you engage them? How do you inspire them to pick up a book, open a piece of equipment, read the operations manual of a piece of equipment, right?
Yeah.
How do you do that?
Yeah. That's so true. What's your answer to that question?
I don't know. It drives me crazy.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
It is. It's one of those things. I think engagement, I'm doing my doctorate in education right now. And so I'm answering these questions constantly in discussions, and I'm working on my research question, and I'm thinking about doing a couple things, but one of them is how do you reduce time to independence? So it's not just all didactic lecture, but how do you get them out of their seat quicker? Is it delivering everything virtually, flipped classroom, and then when they come to class, it's all application? Get them applying the medicine immediately instead of waiting 6 months into a paramedic program, and then you start putting them in clinical settings. What if we started really applying it from day one? Are we going to learn it better? You're going to be more engaged. I don't know what the answer is.
Yeah. Teaching how to learn.
Yeah.
So they don't just learn from that one lecture you gave, but they go further and start learning on their own.
Yeah.
When did the conference start?
Yeah, so the conference was an idea I had on the road. Mike Fricast and I were teaching somewhere. Literally had dinner. We were back in the hotel rooms. I was laying in bed watching TV, exhausted. And it just popped in my head. I sent him a text and I said, what if we started a conference? And then it just popped in my head. FlightBridgeED Air and Surface Transport Symposium. He was like, oh my gosh. We called Ashley the next day. And she's, oh my God. Like,
You know how much work?
And yeah, we've put on the first conference right outside of Nashville in 2018 and lost our ass. It's expensive to put on a conference. 2019 was really successful. We basically broke even and had a lot of growth. And man, I thought we were on our way. And really the idea of FAST was there's nothing wrong with other conferences, right? We go to other conferences. We're part of EMS World and we do all the critical care track for them. But I think there's also a better way to do certain things. And I believe the general session, the way we have it, we didn't come up with that idea. We took that from SMAC. We took that from Eagles, where you have 5, 10, 20-minute talks. Engage the learner and say what you need to say. Don't sit there for an hour and a half lecturing, right, in a conference. How many times have you gone to a conference and you've wanted to see 2 different speakers, but they're speaking at the same time? We didn't want that. We wanted everybody to be able to see every single speaker. And then we wanted to have the production side, right? We wanted it to be just a little bit more from I don't know if theatrical is the right word, but
it's just engaging.
Engaging and just make it more. And we also wanted to break down barriers. If you notice, there's nobody in here that says paramedic, nurse, none of the physicians. There are prominent physicians in that room. They're sitting with everybody. They're corresponding with everybody. They're talking with everybody. Most years we have DeCanto here. Like he'll take people up into a conference room and do salad until 2 a.m. That's the type of inclusion that we want.
That sounds like a party.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that those ideas really stem from seeing others do it, right? SMAC was, I don't know if you ever went to SMAC, but SMAC was an amazing concept. And so taking pieces of that, taking pieces of Eagles, taking pieces of different things and saying, how can we do it our way and keep it intimate, keep it close-knit? We don't necessarily always put out a call for speakers. I will always want to be able to see them speak somewhere. Because I think it's hard. You have people in there that are polished speakers, but to deliver a complex topic in 20 minutes and stay on time, it is really difficult, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it challenges the best of them. That's difficult. COVID definitely wrecked the momentum. Had to go virtual, canceled 2020, virtual in 21, and then Vegas in 22 and 23, and now we're here. So
nice. Where are you guys going to be next year?
Yeah, super excited to announce we're going to be in Lexington, Kentucky. It's going to be a bourbon theme, kind of coming home.
That's home, right? Yeah.
Yeah. It'll be at the Rupp Arena Convention Center there.
Oh, nice.
Where University of Kentucky plays, and beautiful place. So definitely come check that out. Preliminarily, Scott Weingart said he's going to be there. That'll be great.
What are the dates?
Dates are, I think, May 19th, 20th, and 21st. So 19th would be the pre-con. 20th, 21st would be a general session.
Awesome. I love me some bourbon, so I'm going to have to come back.
Yeah.
Okay. Bigger question, but what do you see on the horizon for pre-hospital education?
Yeah. I think that we need to be constantly raising the bar. And I think I realized this. I taught an EMT class 3 years ago, and I was shocked at the level of curriculum that was being taught or required for EMTs. I don't remember being taught glycolysis as an EMT. I know I wasn't. But I'm sitting there teaching glycolysis to EMT students. I'm like, do they need to know this really? So I think the industry has raised the bar, and I think we need to raise the bar. I think paramedics need to have sprinkles of critical care, because I truly think critical care is about understanding things to a broader level. Maybe it's that you don't make a decision on something or pull the trigger on something, kind of being okay, reducing your stress. And so I think there's definitely things that we could do to raise the bar at all levels. I definitely think COVID has made distance education more acceptable. I still see the need for live courses. We're doing more live courses than we've ever done. But the learner still wants access to the online content as well, because it's just like drinking out of a fire hose, like you said. Like they need the time to really grab onto these concepts, review them multiple times. We try to stay true to our mission of partnering in the discovery of each student and just trying to be that good partner, right? So continue to put out the podcast, continue to try to grow our online content. I think that has been our big mission, to expand in that. Got some new stuff coming out, and so pretty exciting.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, again, thanks for having us. It's great.
Yeah, thanks so much. And thanks, Evan and Ashley, as well. We tried to wrangle Evan, but he seems to enjoy hiding from the spotlight.
Oh, yeah. No. Now, you get him on here, he'll talk your ear off.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's definitely a talker, but no, he definitely likes to be behind the scenes.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Eric.
Cool.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Be humble and get to work. Make learning manageable by taking small steps each and every day. Become just 1% better each shift. There's a saying, after 10 years of hard work, they became an overnight success. This is to remind us that no one is born great. You really got to show up and put in the work over and over again to get to where you want to go. Be obsessive about learning what you don't know. Thanks again to FlightBridge for having us and putting on such a great conference, and thank you for tuning into this episode. If you enjoyed what you heard, help us out and tell a friend, and join us on July 15th for our next episode with Scott Weingart from MCRIT, where we'll deep dive with him into the mind of the resuscitationist. Until then, be safe out there.